welcome to the deep dive. It's great to have you with us today.
Yeah, thrilled to be here for this one.
Before we jump into things, do us a huge favor and hit that like and subscribe button. It really helps the show out, and you are definitely not going to want to miss the discussions we have lined up.
Absolutely.
Today's mission is, well, it's a pretty intense one. We are unpacking a brand new, ultra-long, and highly controversial ebook. It's titled White Man's Blessings: Inventing Everything, Civilizing Everywhere by Conrad Riker.
That is a title that definitely sets a tone.
It really does. And right up front, if this deep dive piques your curiosity and you want to read these polarizing arguments for yourself, you can check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the book.
It is an incredibly provocative text. The author has essentially put together this sweeping, unapologetic defense of the white male legacy.
Yeah, and it's written very specifically for an audience of men's rights activists and, men in the red-pilled manosphere.
Right. The entire premise revolves around this idea that modern institutions have basically been captured by feminists and Marxists.
And Riker wants his readers to understand the raw, unvarnished history of those institutions before that ideological shift actually occurred.
Exactly.
Now, because of the highly politically charged nature of this book, we need to issue a mandatory disclaimer right here at the top.
Yep.
We are impartially reporting on the contents of this ebook.
We are not endorsing the author's viewpoints.
No, absolutely not. We're not taking any political sides today. Our job is simply to unpack the fascinating, provocative, and highly polarizing ideas contained in this source material. We just want to see how these arguments are constructed.
Right, we're looking at the architecture of the argument. And to understand the text, you really have to grasp a concept he introduces in the very first chapter. He calls it innovation in gratitude syndrome.
Innovation in gratitude syndrome.
Yeah. The book makes the case that modern society is suffering from a collective delusion. The theory is that the very demographics who built the foundations of modern civilization.
Things like the power grids, objective legal systems, medical breakthroughs.
Exactly. Riker claims those specific builders are now actively demonized as oppressors by the exact same people who benefit the most from those creations.
And the book immediately applies this framework to what it calls the crisis of modern masculinity. There's a whole section arguing that men today are trapped in an impossible double bind.
The double bind is a huge focus for him.
Yeah. He claims that on a biological and societal level, men are still expected to be strong, to provide, and to protect. But the moment they exhibit the traits required to actually do those things,
ambition, dominance, risk-taking.
Right, or even just a healthy aggression, when they show those traits, they are socially punished and labeled toxic.
And the text doesn't just leave that as an abstract idea. It ties this double bind directly to the real-world outcomes of boys today. There's this massive deep dive into data on fatherlessness.
Oh, the CDC data.
Yes. Riker highlights a 2023 CDC finding showing that boys growing up without fathers in the home are 3 times more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD.
3 times.
Yeah. And his argument isn't necessarily that these boys actually have a neurological deficit. He argues that normal male energy is just being pathologized by a system that has no idea what to do with them.
The critique of the educational system is particularly brutal. The author claims schools have become entirely feminized.
And what he means by that is,
instead of channeling a young boy's natural competitiveness or physicality into something productive, the system simply medicates them into compliance, pumping them full of drugs like Adderall.
Right. And he uses a highly specific anecdote to illustrate this. There's the story about a teacher in Portland who was reportedly fired for refusing to use the term toxic masculinity in his classroom.
I remember reading that part. He didn't just quietly resign and go away.
No, not at all. He went on to start a highly successful charter school, and the curriculum of that school focuses heavily on strict discipline, physical trade skills, and active male mentorship.
Which Riker loves.
He points to the massive waitlist for this school as a proof of concept. He's essentially saying, look, the demand for traditional, rigorous male structure is massive. It's just being artificially suppressed by modern academia.
That idea of imposing structure, of dominating chaos, that is really the through line for the entire historical section of the book.
It definitely is.
When the text shifts to early human history, it completely rejects the romanticized modern idea of living in harmony with nature. The author bluntly states that for most of human history, harmony with nature just meant starvation, disease, and freezing to death.
Yeah, he says progress only happened because certain groups decided to dominate nature instead of submitting to it.
Which leads into a fascinating chapter on metallurgy.
Oh, he digs up some incredibly obscure historical moments here to make his point. He introduces us to Aldrich, an English blacksmith from the year 1142.
Right.
Aldrich was actually exiled by his own village
And the reason why is wild.
because he built a mechanical bellows to stoke his forge rather than blowing on the fire with his mouth, which was considered the sacred tradition.
Progress was literally treated as heresy.
Exactly. But the book notes that his superior steel eventually saved that exact same village from raiders. It's a really interesting way to frame technological rebellion.
It is. And the text uses these examples of early industrialization to push back hard against modern narratives of cultural exchange, like that controversial claim regarding Japanese tomahawk steel.
The legendary folded metal used to forge samurai swords.
Yeah. The book cites metallurgical evidence suggesting that this technique was actually reverse engineered from Viking iron samples that made their way across Siberian trade routes.
Which completely flips the script on who was inventing what.
Precisely.
He also points to the Uluburun shipwreck off the coast of Turkey, dating all the way back to 1300 BCE. Marine archaeologists found massive, complex European supply chains moving copper and tin across vast distances.
And Riker's takeaway is that Europeans weren't just trading local trinkets, they were establishing the systematic, mathematical infrastructure of early civilization.
And that exact same logic is applied to agriculture. The book dedicates a surprising amount of time to John Deere's 1837 steel plow.
But it doesn't treat the plow as just a farming tool.
No, the author frames it as a literal declaration of war on chaos.
Before the steel plow, the American prairie was covered in these deep-rooted grasses that would literally shatter cast iron tools. The steel plow conquered that landscape and ultimately fed millions.
And this is where the author draws a sharp contrast with modern environmental movements. He aggressively targets what he calls eco-feminists. He specifically singles out activists like Vandana Shiva.
Yeah, the book blames her for blocking high-yield, genetically modified seeds in developing nations, right?
Yes. His argument is that activists like Shiva prioritize a romanticized, aesthetically pleasing view of traditional farming over actual human survival.
He accuses them of deliberately ignoring the legacy of men like Norman Borlaug.
For those who might not know, Borlaug was an agronomist whose green revolution in the mid-20th century developed disease-resistant wheat varieties. He is widely credited with saving over 1 billion people worldwide from starvation.
1 billion people.
Yeah. And the text asks a pointed question. Why is the man who engineered away mass starvation forgotten, while the activists who protest agricultural science are celebrated?
That question really sets up the next major theme of the book. What happens when a society stops valuing raw results and starts prioritizing virtue signaling?
To answer that, the author pivots to monumental engineering. He holds up the Hoover Dam as the absolute pinnacle of this builder's mindset.
The details on the Hoover Dam are staggering.
They really are. The book highlights men like Chief Engineer Frank Crowe and Surveyor J.G. Tierney.
Tierney was the one who actually died, right?
Yeah, he drowned while surveying the treacherous Colorado River before construction even began. And these men were working in 120-degree heat, inventing unprecedented engineering solutions completely on the fly.
Like the cooling pipes, which absolutely blew my mind.
It's a brilliant example. When you pour that much concrete, the chemical reaction of it curing generates massive amounts of heat.
If they just poured the dam in one go,
It would have taken 125 years to cool down.
and the concrete would have cracked and crumbled.
Exactly. So the engineers embedded 2,000 miles of internal cooling pipes directly into the concrete blocks, pumping ice water through them to force the curing process.
And the book uses that ingenuity to set up a really stark modern contrast. The author pulls a statistic claiming that pre-1970 infrastructure projects have a 92% survival and operational rate over 50 years.
But post-1990 builds, which the book labels as committee-designed or green infrastructure, they have only a 68% survival rate.
The text argues this decline is the direct mathematical result of replacing raw meritocracy with bureaucratic safety cultures and diversity, equity, and inclusion mandates.
It's a bold claim, and it extends this concept of physical structure to societal structure, specifically the rule of law. The book argues that Western law is perhaps the greatest invention of all time because it successfully replaced the chaos of tribal whim with measurable written judgment.
How does the author trace that development historically?
It starts with the Magna Carta in 1215. which established the radical idea that no man, not even a monarch, is above the law.
Okay.
Then it moves to the Habeas Corpus Act of 1679, which demanded that you cannot simply throw someone in a dungeon without a lawful reason.
And it culminates with figures like Lord Chief Justice Campbell.
Right, who utilized the rigid British legal system to officially ban slavery in India in 1857. The author's position is that this objective, rational legal framework, one that removes emotion entirely from justice, is a uniquely Western male creation.
Speaking of removing emotion to achieve the impossible, the section on conquering the sky and space is intense.
Oh, the Chuck Yeager story.
Yes, the book tells the story of Chuck Yeager breaking the sound barrier in the Bell X-1. But the detail that stands out is that Yeager did it with 2 broken ribs from a horseback riding accident.
He couldn't even close the cockpit hatch.
No, he had to use a sawed-off broom handle to lock himself in. The author frames this not as foolishness, but as an expression of raw duty and courage. He says it's the exact kind of unyielding masculinity that today's culture tries to shame.
And that mindset transitions directly into the Apollo program, where the author takes direct aim at recent cultural narratives. He specifically calls out the Hollywood film Hidden Figures.
This is where the book really wades into controversy.
It definitely does. The text acknowledges the undeniable brilliance of female mathematicians like Katherine Johnson and software engineer Margaret Hamilton. But the author argues that modern media deliberately inflates their roles in order to erase the overarching architecture built by men. He points out that the Saturn V rocket was the brainchild of Wernher von Braun and a massive, highly coordinated team of white male engineers.
The book calls it historical vandalism, right?
Yeah.
The idea that movies treat these lead engineers as just arrogant gatekeepers preventing progress.
That's his issue with it. The author's stance is that the women in the Apollo program succeeded precisely because they were operating within a rigid, logical, and highly functional hierarchical system that had been painstakingly built by those men.
So how does the book explain that overarching dominance in science? Because he gives it a name.
He does. He chalks it up to something he calls the rational triad.
Rational triad.
It's a fascinating synthesis. The book argues that Western scientific dominance isn't an accident. It's the fusion of 3 specific philosophical breakthroughs. First, Aristotle's logic, which gave us the tools to categorize and define the world.
Okay.
Second, Francis Bacon's empiricism, which demanded that we actually test our theories through observation rather than just philosophical guessing.
Right.
And third, René Descartes' skepticism, the idea of doubting everything until it can be definitively proven.
And because of that specific triad, the author completely dismisses the modern academic push to decolonize science.
To him, science is not about group consensus or varied ways of knowing. It is about lone, obsessive geniuses pushing the boundaries of reality.
He points to Jonas Salk, who developed the first successful polio vaccine, and Alexander Fleming, who discovered penicillin.
And what's crucial to the author's argument is what those men did with their discoveries. Both were white men who literally gave their life-saving breakthroughs to the world without hoarding the patents.
The book claims this reflects a specific cultural drive to push the species forward, rather than just seeking personal enrichment.
If we follow that logic to its absolute extreme, the book even argues that time itself is a Western invention.
Now, obviously, not the passage of time. The sun sets for everyone.
Right, but the author means precise timekeeping.
This is where we get into the invention of the marine chronometer by men like Pierre Leroy and John Harrison.
Exactly.
Wait, break that down for me. Why is a clock so historically vital? How does knowing the time actually help you navigate the ocean?
It all comes down to calculating longitude, finding out how far east or west you are. The Earth rotates 360 degrees every 24 hours.
Which means it turns 15 degrees every hour.
Right. So if you are on a ship in the middle of the Atlantic and you know from the sun that it is exactly local noon, but your highly accurate clock tells you it is 3 p.m. back in London.
You can mathematically calculate exactly how far west you have traveled.
Precisely. Before the marine chronometer, ships were basically guessing, and thousands of sailors died crashing into unseen coastlines.
That makes the author's critique of modern academia make a lot more sense. The book points out the intense hypocrisy around this exact topic.
He calls out academics at places like Oberlin College or certain UN panels who have recently claimed that standardized time or even the concept of punctuality is a colonial construct used to enforce white supremacy.
And the author finds that critique laughable.
Totally laughable. He points out that global trade, modern hospital logistics, and the GPS in your phone, which calculates your position using satellites that are accurate to a billionth of a second, they rely entirely on this exact mathematical invention.
The text essentially says you cannot hate the clock while demanding the convenience of the GPS.
Yeah. And the book makes a very similar defense for the physical mapping of the world. Cartographers and explorers like Captain James Cook, Lewis and Clark, and Roald Amundsen, who was the first to reach the South Pole.
The author argues that their precise mathematical maps replaced indigenous oral traditions of navigation.
And in doing so, they enabled global trade and saved countless lives. He views the modern critique of these explorers as evil colonialists as a massive luxury.
A luxury enjoyed only by people who navigate the globe safely, using the very maps those men suffered and died to create.
We really need to touch on the psychology section before we wrap up.
Yeah, because the author believes that the modern mind has been totally hijacked.
The book mounts a fierce defense of the pioneers of classical psychology.
There's a great story in there about Noam Chomsky and B.F. Skinner.
Yes. So in the mid-20th century, B.F. Skinner's model of behaviorism was dominant. Behaviorism basically argued that humans are just input-output machines, conditioned entirely by rewards and punishments, much like rats in a maze.
But in 1957, Noam Chomsky, a linguist, published a critique that completely vaporized Skinner's model using pure logic.
He proved that humans have innate, complex mental structures. The author loves this story because it represents rigorous, ironclad debate pushing human understanding forward.
The book also praises the foundational work of Sigmund Freud, Carl Jung, and especially Viktor Frankl,
Frankl survived the Holocaust and went on to develop logotherapy.
which is the psychological pursuit of finding deep meaning even in the midst of horrific suffering.
But the author connects this golden age of rigorous psychology to his outrage over what is happening in university psychology departments today. The text cites a UCLA study showing that 76% of introductory psychology syllabi now incorporate social justice modules.
And how does the book interpret those modules?
According to the author, these modules reframe foundational thinkers like Freud and Skinner not as brilliant pioneers, but as flawed oppressors whose theories are tainted by their race and gender.
The argument is that modern psychology has abandoned the pursuit of resilience, self-actualization, and meaning.
And in its place, it has installed a trauma-informed culture that actively glorifies victimhood and fragility.
He claims this erasure isn't just happening in classrooms, it's happening everywhere in media. He brings up some wild examples of deliberate cultural erasure.
Like the Netflix series Transatlantic.
Yes. The show invented a fictional black female engineer to serve as the hero, completely replacing Cyrus Field, who was the actual historical white man who financed and drove the creation of the first transatlantic telegraph cable.
He also points his sights at museums. The author claims that the Smithsonian has quietly hidden away Otto Lilienthal's glider.
Lilienthal was a German pioneer of aviation who made the first well-documented reproducible glider flights.
Literally laying the groundwork for the Wright brothers. But according to the book, his contributions are being sidelined behind new exhibits focused on decolonizing the sky.
It's just a relentless critique from start to finish. To summarize, White Man's Blessings is an incredibly controversial manifesto. It is a fierce, unapologetic defense of the historical achievements of white men, and a blistering attack on what the author views as the ideological capture of modern institutions by feminism and Marxism.
It is a dense, challenging read. But regardless of where you stand on the author's politics or his tone, the book's premise does force us to consider a fascinating implication.
Something that extends far beyond the history it covers.
Exactly. Think about the massive leaps humanity is trying to make right now. Things like programming artificial general intelligence or building the first permanent colonies on Mars.
Right.
If a society fundamentally shifts its educational narrative to teach the next generation that the great builders of the past were primarily just oppressors and villains, how does that alter the psychology of our future innovators?
Will it actually inspire them to build better, more equitable systems?
Or will it inadvertently kill the audacity required to take massive world-changing risks out of fear that they too will eventually be labeled as problematic?
Wow. That is an incredible question and a heavy thought to leave you with. If you want to dive into the deep end and read these polarizing arguments for yourself, remember you can check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the ebook.
And you can also follow the author at Conrad Riker at Substack for more of his writing and updates on his work.
Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. Don't forget one last time to hit that like and subscribe button before you go. We will see you on the next one.